Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this second edition of the Hangout discussion on prevention of child abuse.
Very good afternoon.
For today's discussion, we will focus on the preventive measures of child abuse because most of the laws and the police system and the judicial system is all focused on helping the children who've gone through abuse. But in today's discussion, we'll talk about what are the measures that can be taken to ensure that children do not have to go through that abuse. So to begin the discussion, I would just like to draw your attention to this report by the Human Rights Watch, which says that more than 53% children in India have faced abuse. Now, the abuse can be sexual abuse, it could be emotional abuse, it could be negligence, it could be violence. So the abuse takes many forms, and in our country, it has become a big problem which needs to be addressed. So to begin the discussion, I would like to ask all of you that what do you think could be the one very important step that you would like to suggest could be a preventive measure?
To my mind, education is... Yeah, education I think would be the first and foremost, because it's very difficult to detect abuse. It comes in so many forms that you had mentioned, and sometimes you don't even know it's happening. So it's very, very difficult. If you educate the parents, you educate the children themselves, you educate teachers on it, and go on further spreading the process, then it's probably likely that people will be able to identify it rather than not even be aware that it exists. I think that is the first and foremost thing required.
Yes, Professor Krishna, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, in fact, I also agree with Professor Check. I think, increasing awareness is the most important thing. As you already mentioned, many of these abuses actually go unreported.
Yes.
So therefore, it's important to increase the awareness among parents, among children, and among all people get to things the children who are abused.
Tracking up.
Okay. Since both of you have stressed on a similar point, you've talked about education and you've talked about awareness. So when we talk of awareness, because these are children who are going through abuse, and UNICEF says everybody under the age of 18 is categorized as a child. Now, when you're talking of very young children who may not be even aware that what is happening to them is actually abuse. So if it is violence at home, they might take it as something they have to just bear, and they do not think that it is the right thing to report. So how do we go about creating that awareness to an age group which is very, very, at a very tender age, and maybe they're not even aware of the implications of what is happening to them? So how do we go about creating that kind of awareness, especially very young children? So when we are talking of a toddler or a first child going to a kindergarten school.
I think you, please carry on.
Yeah, I think one thing which you can do is to teach children, to teach them what is good touch and bad touch.
Yes.
In fact, a lot of young children do not even know about these things. So therefore, it's important to tell them what are bad touches, what kind of touches are not acceptable by others. I think these kind of things are easily taught to toddlers and young children.
I think at this age, more than teaching the toddlers, it's got to be the teachers and the people who have been in contact with them who have to learn to be aware, alert, sensitive to what may be happening. It's only when the child probably gets a little bigger that you can sensitize the child to it. Because when the parent comes into the same deal and others come into it, but the child at that age, to my mind, will not really understand. So when the child is 5 or 6, maybe you can start that kind of education, starting with the schools, I guess, and maybe in parts of communities. If you have something like a welfare association, then you sort of have meetings of people there where they discuss this and figure out how to pass it on to the child in a way that the child can comprehend it, because the child is really very young.
In fact, I just... Yes, sir, please go on, please go on.
I also read somewhere actually the children that are most prone to abuse are in the
I'm not getting Professor Krishna's voice clearly.
Age of 5 to 12 years. So, is it better now?
Yes, yes, better now.
Okay. Now, what I am saying is, now the age group of 5 to 12 is the age group that is abused most.
Yes.
So therefore, it's important, tell them. It's important to tell them, about these kind of things, and also important to tell them, whom to approach if they face abuse.
In case
Many of them,
yes.
many of them maybe may feel shame or guilt, to tell their parents. So therefore, it's important to tell them these things, and then how to approach others, and then tell these things to others.
In fact, in this regard, I just read that the Chhattisgarh government this year has introduced a chapter in the books from class 5 onwards, which educates the children. It's through a story which is called Raju Ki Kahani, where they talk about the good touch and the bad touch. It is from class 5 onwards for the children. So maybe yes, we do need measures like that where we have to educate the child. But sometimes we hear about these steps being taken, like a helpline has been created for children. Now, do you think that really helps? Because most of the children are not even aware about these helplines that are created, or do not have access to these helplines that are created.
To my mind, I don't think it would be very effective, because children would find it very difficult to explain it across the helpline. Number one, providing they have access to it and they have the information. To my mind, more is required of schools, where sensitization takes place, where education takes place. I'm not talking about just sexual abuse, which is what we seem to be talking about a lot now. I'm talking about things like bullying. It happens a lot in schools.
Yes.
It happens from peers. So there are things like movies, things like educating them with small plays, skits, to tell them that bullying is bad and it's not really something that is a sign of courage, it's more a sign of cowardice. The bully is more likely to have an impact on them. You shame the bully, is unlikely to try doing it again. Or to tell him it's not really a macho thing to do, it's a sign of weakness. So I think with that age group, when it's a little more sensitive, would be more amenable to that kind of education, rather than thinking it's a cool thing to bully kids and be nasty to them.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think telephone line kind of thing is going to work, for this kind of kids, because they're too young to use this kind of facilities. Probably telephone helpline may work, let us say children above 15-16 years. But anything below that, I don't think that they'll be able to actually call up and actually explain what happened to them. This I don't think it's going to work.
Also, I think a fair degree of responsibility lies with parents. They need to be a little more involved in their children. We seem to be a little scared to get into our children's lives these days. Our parents were far more involved than ours, but today's kid is so standoffish and leave me alone and this is not nice, that we tend to get a little afraid. So I think we need to be a little more brave, a little more involved in our kids' lives and know where they go, at least who they are involved with. And this could be one way that would prevent to some extent the kind of abuse that we are talking about.
As Professor Chuck pointed out, that we are talking of sexual abuse, but talking about other forms of bullying and other kinds of violence that we talk about. Only in our country, when things really become serious and grave, then we think there is some measure to be taken and then some recourse is to be done. But what happens in smaller cases or things which we consider are not we leave the child to his own to sort it out or to figure it out. Like bullying is one thing that you talked about, Professor Chuck. So what happens in these kind of cases where there is a grave situation that has happened, incident has happened, then we talk about prevention, we talk about, so like we keep on talking about sexual abuse, but there are so many other kinds of abuses that are happening. So it may be a child may be going through domestic, seeing parents fighting violence at home. So those are the kind of instances which are not addressed in our country. So what about these kind of scenarios?
I think again, as sensitization, awareness, parents themselves would be under a lot of pressure. So I think coaching, training, getting RWAs, communities to get together and educate parents generally in small groups could go a long way in this direction, because many parents would not be aware at all. So you see a movie or you see a social film, something like that is really a very useful measure. So see a thing like 3 Idiots, for example. Nothing to do with bullying, but for example, it made such an impact on people. It was a point being made across. I think similar points can be made across about bullying, about parents actually not realizing that the child is suffering emotional abuse. Things like that I think would go a long way in educating the general public. Because the normal educated public is fairly aware. Or even that public could be doing it because there may be mental problems that the parent is having or the adult is having. So there the adult needs help. And therefore only the community needs to be aware of that and perhaps even mobilize public opinion if necessary to ensure that the child is not abused.
Yeah, true. In fact, I was reading somewhere a lot of abuse actually comes through family members. May not necessarily through immediate family always. For example, distant family members, cousins, uncles, aunties. A lot of these people are actually involved in abuse of children many times. So therefore, as Professor Check said, it's important to sensitize parents about these things. The abuse can come from family members as well. And the second thing, of course, the corporal punishment in schools is also a kind of abuse. Beating children for not doing homework, making them stand up on the benches. All these kind of things can cause emotional trauma to children. Therefore, it's important to educate teachers and parents about these things.
Right.
Even in case of isolation, you have a child neglected in a school, he's put aside and the next condemn him or ostracize him. That's when the teacher needs to be sensitive. So I think a whole lot of measures need to come together because there are so many different types of abuse. It's not easy to sort of do a roadmap for just child abuse. Child abuse in its various manifestations. Maybe NGOs have a role in this also, in educating people. I'm sure they're doing a good job in this. There are communities which are doing it. We have something like a Child Abuse Prevention Month, I believe, this month of April. So things like this, I think, are going in this direction. We are far more aware now than we were in our own childhood or even when we are growing up as parents in this respect.
But there seems to be a tendency from parents also, sir, as you said, Professor Krishna, that parents also tend to hide. Something bad happens to the child, there is a sort of shroud of secrecy is created. A child is not encouraged to speak. So culturally also we are not ready to face those situations and we want to hide it. So how can parents be made more open about talking about these issues? They are not even open and willing to discuss certain issues with their children, where they think that the child is too young to talk about these things. The child should not be even told about these things. These are bad things to be hidden from the child. So how do we make parents open up and share more things with their parents? We all realize they should do it, but then how do we make them do it more?
Krishna, would you like to react to that?
See, I think, as I already mentioned, the only ways to encourage parents, to talk about, these things to children. I think, as I already said, probably this needs a kind of change in mindset and also, a kind of cultural change, being more open about, this, abuse, either sexual or physical or emotional abuse, and, kind of generating, awareness in the society as a whole. So therefore, people start feel comfortable about talking these things.
See, I think I agree with him. I think one big role that can be played is by media. For example, what's happening on rape these days? It seems suddenly that rape has come alive in the world. It was always there. But the media has played a big role. People are coming forward and talking about it because it was considered the girl was at fault and she was neglected by families, thrown out of the families. But I think a lot has changed in society itself. And this kind of thing, being more open about it, getting media into it without necessarily sensationalizing it, is one move that can help in this direction. Because the more open society becomes and people are willing to talk, I think the same thing will hold true of child abuse. Because these are stigmas which are held under the carpet generally. People don't like it, they don't want to be involved in the neighbors saying things and stuff like that. So they become more confident, and more people are doing it, then they'll not be so afraid. And even the people who are perpetrating the child abuse will be far more scared than they are today.
Any special kind of training that the teachers should go through? Because a teacher of maths is only supposed to know maths and a teacher of English is only supposed to know English. So do you think this, schools should have some mandatory system of training the teachers to look for signs of any abuse that the child might be going through, or counseling if they see a child is going through a difficult time?
Absolutely. I think it's very, very necessary. And some schools are doing it. I know, for example, my wife's school, Vasant Valley, does that. Has courses on bullying. They sensitize them. They send teachers to various workshops on things like bullying. And I think lots of schools must be doing that, to my mind. And this is a very welcome step, and it should continue.
Yes, Professor Krishna.
Again, yeah. I guess, in fact, teachers can be told about what kind of symptoms a child may exhibit, when he comes across abuse. And teachers may be specially told, to notice, to look for, these kind of symptoms. And then, whenever they notice them, counsel the student or, take appropriate action.
Yeah, the one thing comes in the way of this.
Professor Krishna, that. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, please go on, Professor Chak.
No, what I was saying was, what you are saying is true not only of school education, it's true everywhere else. We have functional specializations even in management. So the teacher who teaches you the general courses thinks he's responsible for your general education, while as the functional guy thinks he's not. Similarly, a maths teacher or a science teacher would say, forget it, why should I bother? But I think what you are saying is right. Sensitize all the teachers to it, because this can happen anywhere in any class. So it should not be one class teacher as such who is responsible for the welfare of children under a control, but all teachers should be equally responsible.
Absolutely. Not only teachers, I also, parents, should also be sensitized, to watch, these kind of symptoms at home, and then whenever they notice, these kind of symptoms at home, they should take immediate action, or at least talk to child openly.
I would like to ask this, Professor Krishna, that we see that children, once they are in the age of 10 years and above, they do access the social media a lot. And they have access to content and stuff. And we have also heard a lot of child abuse that is happening through Facebook also, where the pictures of children and all are being used. So how in that aspect children should be made aware of that, how they should be careful of how they are using the social media. Recently there was a case of a lot of sites in Kerala which were using pictures of children from Facebook for different wrong purposes.
Yeah, what you're talking about is what we generally call pedophilia.
Yes.
Lot of scoundrels are there in not only Facebook or on various platforms of internet who keep looking for children and then for easy prey, as
yes.
Telling children these kind of things to happen on internet. So therefore these are the likely ways a predator may actually try to get in touch with them, and then if those kind of things happen, what kind of actions need to be taken, or whom to tell, these kind of things. I think it's extremely important to tell children these things. In fact, yeah.
Yes.
You're saying something.
No, please go on.
When my son started, using Facebook, I also actually, had a discussion with him about these things. These kind of things do happen online, so therefore be careful, when you come across these kind of things. I think so. Therefore, it's important to sensitize parents about these things, and also to sensitize children, and then so that they can talk to each other when these kind of things do happen online. I think it's very common. It's very common online.
Right. So can we have a final word from both of you? Then we can probably conclude the discussion, or would you like to add some point?
I think we more or less gone through most of what we had to say, but I think it's education, awareness, sensitization, and talking about it in every possible forum where one can. Perhaps things like PTAs can also help in this, because parents need to be involved a lot more than they are. Most of us are peripheral. We go to a kids' meeting once in maybe a year, and that's it. But I think we need to be a little more involved in our kids. I have a feeling parents have got too far away. In fact, this generation, I think, is far farther from their parents than we were from ours. In some ways it was annoying, but in other ways I think it was very, very useful, because a lot of these things were not even necessarily discussed, but came up peripherally, and you figured out that this is right and this is wrong. I think much of this is missing today.
Right. So I think in the discussion we have all agreed, yes, it is about creating more awareness, sensitization, education, and basically it's all about creating an environment of openness where children feel free to talk about their problems, creating those channels where they have the confidence that they can come out and voice whatever feelings or emotions they might have on an issue which is big or small. We should not judge and tell a child that this is not important, this you should not be sharing.
Absolutely.
So making just child realize that the dialogue open all the time. In fact, one of my friends once told me that one of the biggest rules that they have in their family is that there are no secrets. So child should be told that because the predators generally work on the psychology, the fear psychology of the child. So teaching our children, there are no secret with your parents, whatever it might be, big or small, come out and say. And when the child comes forward and shares anything with us, with what is making the child uncomfortable, I think we should be patient and listening with a lot of empathy to the child.
Yeah.
So if we have got the audio from Professor Krishna, probably we can have the final word from him and then end the discussion.
I think he's gone off the map.
Okay, I think yes. So thank you, Professor Cha. Thank you, Professor Krishna.
Welcome.